What if the person trained to save your life looked you in the eye and chose not to? A mother boards a plane with her sick child, expecting a few hours in the air. But what happens at 30,000 feet will spark a national outcry and a question that hits every parent hard. Would they believe me in time? Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The terminal at Greenstone International was buzzing in that low, frayed way that only happens when delays stretch past the second hour. The air smelled like reheated coffee and damp carpet. Over the intercom, another weather delay was announced for Flight 237 to Washington, D.C., followed by a groan that rippled across the seated crowd like a quiet wave of defeat. LaTanya Brooks sat near Gate 12, legs crossed tightly at the ankle, her purse in her lap, and her daughter's tiny backpack resting at her feet. She didn't glance up at the announcement. She didn't need to. This was the third delay, and she'd long stopped hoping it would be the last. 9-year-old Nia leaned against her shoulder, small and too quiet. That silence always made LaTanya nervous. Her daughter wasn't the loud type to begin with, but when Nia went still like this, eyes glazed, hands cold, LaTanya's nerves danced under her skin. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a small bottle of juice, uncapped it, and held it to Nia's lips. The girl took a slow sip, obedient but sluggish. "You okay, baby?" LaTanya whispered. Nia blinked, tried to nod, then rested her head back on her mother's shoulder. LaTanya exhaled. She hated flying, hated how vulnerable it made everything feel. Back home in Pasadena, she could manage Nia's condition with quick runs to the clinic or calls to their family doctor. But this trip to D.C. was about finding answers, real ones. St. Alder's Children's Center had specialists and hope and maybe even a diagnosis that made sense. This was all LaTanya had left to try. Across the terminal, a tall woman in a crisp navy uniform stood at the gate, clipboard in hand. Deborah Klein scanned the waiting crowd with the expression of someone grading a test they didn't believe you'd pass. Her posture was perfect, her hair pulled back into a taut twist that matched the tone in her voice when she began to call boarding groups. When Deborah's eyes passed over LaTanya and Nia, she paused. Her gaze flicked from the girl's pale face to the open juice bottle to the tired set of LaTanya's shoulders. Then she turned slightly and leaned toward the flight attendant beside her. "Another attention seeker," she muttered, lips barely moving. The other attendant didn't respond. Deborah just shrugged like it was a joke, only she understood. LaTanya heard it. She didn't flinch, didn't stand up and say anything. She just reached for Nia's backpack and helped her daughter to her feet when their group was called. But inside, under the layers of patience and planning, under the calm voice she used with doctors and insurance agents and teachers who always assumed Nia was just being dramatic, something flared. They made their way slowly down the jet bridge, Nia's hand tight in hers. LaTanya didn't look at the flight attendant again, but she remembered her voice. It had the weight of assumption behind it. That tone people use when they think they've seen your type before and decided what you're worth. Once inside the plane, they found their seats, row 25, right side, window, and middle. LaTanya let Nia have the window. She settled in beside her, arranging the tote under the seat, checking the juice, the glucose tablets, the soft cereal bar she always packed just in case. She'd called ahead, let the airline know about Nia's condition. They'd flagged the record. But no one ever seemed to take it seriously until it was too late. As they fastened seat belts and listened to the safety announcement, LaTanya glanced down at her daughter. Nia's eyes were closed. Her breathing was shallow, but steady. Just a few more hours, she told herself. Just hold on, baby girl. Meanwhile, at the front of the cabin, Deborah walked down the aisle with the tight professionalism of someone who prided herself on control. She wasn't here to make friends. Her job was to keep the plane in order, the passengers fed, the rules followed. When she passed row 25, she glanced sideways, saw the girl with her head down, saw the mother watching her like a hawk. Deborah didn't break stride. She'd seen this kind of thing before: panic moms, sick kids, people who thought a plane was a place to expect special treatment. She had dealt with seizures, anxiety attacks, people faking both. Sympathy didn't come easy anymore. Not after 23 years in the air. Back in her seat, LaTanya gently brushed a curl from Nia's forehead. Her daughter didn't stir. Something about this trip felt heavier than usual. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the voice she'd overheard. Or maybe it was just a mother's instinct, an ache in the chest that wouldn't let go. She didn't know yet that the storm outside the window wasn't the only one waiting to break loose. LaTanya shifted in her seat for what felt like the 100th time. Row 25C was tight, the kind of seat where your knees brushed the one in front of you even if you weren't tall. She glanced sideways at Nia, who had barely touched the cereal bar LaTanya had slipped into her hands after takeoff. Her daughter's small face looked even paler than before, with a thin sheen of sweat collecting above her upper lip. "Come on, baby," LaTanya whispered, brushing Nia's damp hair from her forehead. "You gotta eat just a little." Nia gave a faint nod, but didn't respond. Her eyes stayed half-lidded, her breathing shallow. LaTanya checked her watch, then checked again. Only 45 minutes into the flight. Not even halfway. The cabin around them buzzed with the low hum of air vents, people tapping on their screens, flight attendants passing by with carts. No one seemed to notice that something was wrong. She reached under the seat for her tote and pulled out a small glucose meter. She hesitated. Nia didn't like the finger pricks, especially in public. But LaTanya didn't have the luxury of second-guessing right now. She turned on the meter, pricked Nia's finger gently, and watched the numbers populate on the screen. 62. Too low. Too soon. Her heart tightened. She pressed the call button above her head. It lit up in orange, and a few seconds later, a familiar figure walked down the aisle toward them. Deborah Klein. LaTanya lifted her hand slightly. "Excuse me, my daughter's blood sugar is dropping. Could she have a juice box or even a piece of bread from the galley? I didn't realize she'd crash this quickly." Deborah didn't make eye contact. She looked down at Nia, then at the open tote bag with a sigh. "Ma'am, unless you pre-ordered a meal, we can't provide food or beverages beyond the scheduled service," she said. Her voice had that customer service tone, pleasant on the surface, empty underneath. "I'm not asking for a full meal," LaTanya said carefully. "She's hypoglycemic. She could pass out if she doesn't get something soon." Deborah's expression didn't shift, but her tone cooled. "We've had folks pull this kind of thing before just to get extras. We follow a strict protocol." Protocol. LaTanya blinked, stunned. This isn't about protocol. This is about a 9-year-old who might lose consciousness if you don't hand me a damn juice. There it was. That tiny flicker in Deborah's eyes. Judgment. Maybe even a smirk. Like she had already decided who LaTanya was. Loud, dramatic, difficult. Deborah leaned closer, voice lowered. "You didn't buy anything ahead of time, and now you're demanding emergency service. It's disruptive to the rest of the cabin." LaTanya clenched her jaw. She could feel heat rising in her neck, a wave of helpless anger she'd fought off 100 times before, in grocery stores, at school meetings, in waiting rooms where no one looked up when she said her name. A voice cut through the tension. "Is everything okay here?" LaTanya turned to see a man standing just one row ahead. Early 30s, neatly kept beard, soft gray t-shirt, calm eyes. He wasn't tall, but he had a presence, steady and quiet. He moved into the aisle, nodding slightly toward LaTanya. "I'm Emery Hall. I'm a pediatric resident. If you don't mind, ma'am, could I take a quick look?" LaTanya nodded before she could even speak. Deborah hesitated. "We don't usually allow passengers to." "I'm not asking for access to the cockpit," Emery said gently, already crouching beside Nia. "I just want to make sure she's stable." LaTanya watched him as he took Nia's pulse, asked her name, then looked at LaTanya for her glucose number. She showed him the meter. "She's heading toward hypoglycemic shock," he murmured. "If she's not treated, we could be looking at early coma symptoms." He straightened, turning to Deborah. "She needs sugar, now. I don't care if it's juice, soda, honey, whatever you've got." Deborah crossed her arms. "Are you even licensed?" Emery raised an eyebrow. "You want to check my NPI number while a child goes unconscious, or do you want to do your job?" LaTanya almost smiled, but it vanished just as quickly as it came. Nia had closed her eyes again. "Please," Latanya said, her voice trembling. "I don't care who gives it to her. Just help my baby." There was a pause. For a moment, Latanya thought Deborah might argue again. Then a passenger across the aisle reached into her purse and handed Emery a roll of fruit snacks. "Will this help?" the woman asked, her voice tight with concern. "Yes, thank you." Emery opened the package and gently slid one into Nia's mouth. Latanya held her daughter's hand and watched her chest rise and fall. Still shallow, but steady. She didn't look up at Deborah. She didn't need to. The real story was already unfolding, one breath at a time. The air in the cabin had started to feel heavier, like everyone was breathing through cloth. It wasn't just the altitude. Something in the atmosphere had shifted. Whispers trickled across the rows. A few heads had turned when Deborah dismissed Latanya's request, but now the silence around row 25 buzzed with something else, unease. Latanya sat frozen, gripping Nia's hand, watching the color drain from her daughter's face. Her lips had started to tint a soft bluish gray. Nia's eyelids fluttered once, then stayed closed. Latanya pressed her palm to her daughter's cheek. "Cold. Too cold." "I need juice now," she said again, louder this time. "She's not responding." Deborah stood by the beverage cart, arms crossed. "Ma'am, like I said, if you didn't pre-order." "She's 9, Latanya snapped, her voice cracking. "And she's sick." A woman seated across the aisle, gray cardigan, maybe late 50s, spoke up. "She told you it's a medical issue," the woman said. "You can't just stand there and do nothing." Deborah didn't even blink. "With all due respect, we've had passengers fake seizures for attention. I've been doing this for 20 years. I know what's real and what's exaggerated." Latanya's heart sank. That tone, clinical, dismissive, insulated behind years of believing you've seen it all, was the worst kind of arrogance. The kind that made you feel invisible even while you were screaming. Then it happened. Nia's body jerked once, just a twitch, and went limp. A shriek ripped from Latanya's throat. "Nia." The woman next to her gasped and half rose out of her seat. Latanya grabbed her daughter's shoulders, shaking her gently, patting her cheeks. "Nia, baby, wake up, please." The panic unraveled everything. A flight attendant at the back looked up. Passengers started to murmur louder, craning their necks. Someone yelled for help. The phone in the hand of a young man, 2 rows up, started recording. He aimed the camera steadily, catching Latanya's face, the way Deborah stood frozen near the galley, and the words she'd just said replayed from memory on the recording. Then Emery was there again. "Clear path," he said sharply. "Move back." He dropped to his knees beside Nia and did a quick assessment, checking her pulse, peeling back an eyelid. "She's crashing. We need sugar right now." Deborah opened her mouth, but before she could get a word in, someone further up the aisle called out, "I've got hard candy." A woman reached over with a few wrapped pieces. Emery grabbed one, tore it open with his teeth, and gently pressed it against Nia's lips, coaxing it past her teeth. "Keep her upright," he said to Latanya. "Support her head." Good, just like that. The cabin was no longer just a cabin. It was a live wire. Some passengers stood halfway in the aisle. Others whispered with worried eyes. No one was watching the in-flight movie anymore. "I need the cockpit," Emery called out. Another attendant relayed the message. Within seconds, the intercom beeped and a voice announced that the captain was requesting immediate landing clearance due to a medical emergency. Latanya didn't move. She couldn't. She sat stiff as stone, holding Nia like she was made of porcelain, praying that the sugar would hit her bloodstream before something irreversible happened. Deborah, still by the galley, finally picked up the cabin phone and called the front. Her face was unreadable, but she didn't approach the row again. The young man still had his phone raised, filming in silence. The elderly woman across the aisle leaned over toward Latanya. "She's going to be okay," she whispered, squeezing Latanya's arm. "You did everything right." Latanya wanted to believe that, but her chest was tight, her ears ringing. "I told her," she murmured. "I told her my baby needed help." Another chime echoed through the cabin. The pilot's voice returned. We've been cleared for expedited landing at Reagan National. Flight crew, prepare the cabin. Another passenger, college-aged, baseball cap, earbuds still in, was already uploading the video online. A title scrawled across the screen. Flight attendant refuses to help sick kid. Watch what happens. The video ended on Deborah's face, stone cold, arms crossed, as a child went limp 3 rows behind her. Within minutes, the name Skylynx Air was being typed, searched, tagged, and questioned across the internet. But LaTanya wasn't thinking about that. Not yet. She was focused on Nia's shallow breaths, the way her chest finally started to move a little easier. The grip in her hand tightening, just a little. She closed her eyes. Not in relief. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, in hope. Somewhere over the Appalachian Mountains, while the plane cut through layers of gray cloud, a different kind of storm had begun to build, not in the sky, but online. A young woman in a hoodie 2 rows up had been live streaming ever since the moment LaTanya screamed her daughter's name. She hadn't said much, just held her phone steady while the chaos unfolded. The panic, the refusal, the calm intervention from the man who turned out to be a doctor. She hadn't planned on being part of anything. But then a comment popped up on her feed. Wait, isn't that the same flight attendant who made the news in 2019? Elderly man in a wheelchair. Others chimed in. Some recognized Deborah's face. Someone dug up the article. A headline surfaced. Flight attendant faces criticism after ignoring distressed passenger with Parkinson's. Comments poured in faster than she could read them. The video started to spread. Across platforms, through threads, then picked up by travel bloggers, parenting groups, and disability advocates. LaTanya didn't know any of this yet. She sat in the front galley now, far from row 25, away from where it had all happened. A younger flight attendant, maybe mid-20s, gentle-eyed and visibly shaken, had taken over for Deborah. She brought LaTanya a warm cloth for her hands and offered a quiet apology. "I'm so sorry for what happened back there," she said softly, barely above the engine hum. "None of that should have gone the way it did." LaTanya gave her a tired nod. She didn't have the energy for a reply. Her mind was still with Nia, who now lay across 3 seats, a blanket pulled up to her chin, Emery still keeping watch. A man in a blazer approached from the cockpit. He introduced himself as a corporate liaison for Skylynx Air. His smile was thin, polite, but hollow, like a hotel manager delivering a refund after a sewage leak. "We're terribly sorry for the distress this situation has caused," he said. "We want to make things right as quickly and quietly as possible." He slid a form across the tray table between them. "This document simply confirms that appropriate measures were taken in flight and that you've received assistance consistent with our emergency protocol." LaTanya stared at it. Black text on a white page. Very official. Very clean. A signature line waited at the bottom, next to her name, pre-typed. She picked up the pen he handed her. Her hand trembled, fingers tight around the barrel. This was the trade, wasn't it? Sign and things stay easy. Sign, and they'll help you get Nia into the ambulance. Sign, and they won't drag you through meetings and media and legal questions. She looked up at him. "If I don't sign this," she asked. He cleared his throat. "We would still provide all necessary medical follow-up and documentation. But it may complicate how this situation is reviewed internally." Internally. That word settled like a stone in her gut. She'd heard it before. At schools, hospitals, job interviews. That invisible line between "we'll take care of it" and "nothing will happen." Her mind drifted, not to the chaos on the plane, but to something smaller, quieter. 2 weeks ago, Nia had woken up with a headache. She'd been pale and weak. LaTanya tried to get her to eat, but she couldn't keep anything down. That afternoon, lying on the couch, Nia had looked up at her and asked, in the softest voice, "Mom, if I say I don't feel good, will you believe me? Even if I don't look sick on the outside?" LaTanya had nodded, stroked her daughter's cheek, and said, "Always." Now sitting in the sky, with a corporate form in front of her, and her daughter, still weak in the next row, she saw it all clearly. This wasn't just about Deborah. It wasn't even just about Skylynx. It was about what people like her, black mothers, poor mothers, single mothers, were expected to accept in silence. expected to sign away just to be heard. LaTanya set the pen down. "I'm not signing this." The man blinked. "Ma'am, I assure you, I'm not looking for trouble," she said, her voice low but firm. "I just want people to stop assuming my daughter is lying when she's in pain, and stop treating me like I don't know what's best for her." He opened his mouth again, but she held up her hand. "You got lawyers," she said. "You handle it however you want. But my signature's not going to clean up what happened today." The man stood quietly for a moment, then nodded once and took the form back. LaTanya leaned back in her seat and looked out the tiny oval window. They were starting to descend now. The clouds thinned, and the dark shapes of D.C. buildings began to break through. She didn't know what came next. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like the quietest voice in the room anymore. They were descending now. The captain's voice crackled through the speakers, calm and rehearsed, letting everyone know they'd be on the ground soon. But for LaTanya, time felt suspended. She sat cradling Nia's head against her chest, rocking gently back and forth, her own breath moving in shaky waves. Nia had stirred a few minutes ago, just a flutter of her lashes, a faint twitch in her fingers, but she hadn't fully come back yet. Her lips were no longer blue, though. That was something. LaTanya pressed her forehead to the top of her daughter's head and closed her eyes. She didn't care how many strangers were watching. Tears fell quietly. She didn't wipe them away. They weren't just tears for Nia anymore. They were for every time she'd been forced to defend herself to someone in a position of power who didn't believe her. Every time a doctor spoke over her. Every time a teacher assumed she was one of those mothers. Every time a front desk worker asked if she was the nanny. And now this. They didn't even believe a child. Not when she was black. Not when her mother looked tired. Not when they both didn't look like an emergency. Across the aisle, someone whispered, "That's the mom from the video." Another replied, "It's all over Twitter now." LaTanya wasn't on Twitter, but she could feel something happening, like the plane was no longer just flying toward Washington, but flying straight into a spotlight she hadn't asked for. The video had gone viral. More than 200,000 shares in under an hour. Clips replayed Deborah's voice, caught by livestream. Kids these days know how to fake it for attention. Another clip showed her arms crossed, unmoved, as LaTanya's cries rang through the cabin. The internet didn't hesitate. "She's 9 and unconscious." And this is the response. "Fire her. Immediately. This is why people don't trust the system." Believe black mothers. Influencers reposted it. Nurses weighed in. Parents from all backgrounds wrote comments that blended outrage and heartbreak. Some said they'd been dismissed, too, at hospitals, in schools, on flights. Some had names for it. Others just called it what it was, not being seen. LaTanya didn't know all of this yet, but she could feel the air shifting. Some weight, some truth, moving through the cabin with the power of a storm. A few rows ahead, Emery checked his phone. His face went still. Then, quietly, he turned the screen toward LaTanya. It was a post from McAllister Children's Hospital in Baltimore. A clean white background. Navy letters. "We are proud of our pediatric resident, Dr. Emery Hall, whose quick thinking on today's Skylinks flight helped stabilize a young passenger in distress. We're grateful he was in the right place at the right time." LaTanya stared at it, then at him. "You work there?" He nodded. 3 years now." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "And they still tried to question you." He smiled, but it was a tired smile. "Doesn't matter what credentials you carry. Some folks only see what they want." LaTanya looked down at Nia again, brushing her thumb along her daughter's brow. "Yeah, that's the truth." Deborah hadn't come back. The younger attendant, the one who'd brought her a warm towel earlier, hovered nearby, checking on things quietly. No more attitude. No more silence. Just concern. The kind LaTanya had wanted all along. Someone tapped Emery's shoulder and pointed to a screen. He turned again, brows rising slightly. More comments were coming in. Someone had found an old article about Deborah. "Is this the same flight attendant who ignored an elderly man with Parkinson's?" One tweet read. "Why is she still employed?" Another included a screenshot from a 2019 piece. Airline investigates claims of neglect after passenger left unattended in wheelchair during emergency. That article had slipped by most people then, but not now. Not with video. Not with a sick child. LaTanya didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The people were speaking louder than she ever could. And she didn't feel like she had to carry the weight alone. The captain announced final descent. Flight attendants moved through the cabin, doing their final checks. But it felt different now. No one rushed. No one looked away. And when the wheels touched down, a few passengers clapped, not for the landing, but for something bigger. Maybe for Nia. Maybe for LaTanya. Maybe for all the moments like this that had gone unnoticed, unspoken, unrecorded. This one, though, wouldn't be forgotten. The hospital walls were too white. Not the comforting kind of white, like soft sheets or morning light, but sterile, buzzing white. The kind that made LaTanya feel small. Like every minute spent waiting for news about Nia's condition dragged a little more color out of her world. They'd wheeled Nia into pediatric intensive care the moment the ambulance doors opened. Nurses moved with crisp, calculated speed. LaTanya had answered what felt like 100 questions before she was finally allowed to sit beside her daughter's bed. Tubes, monitors, beeps, the soft hiss of oxygen. She didn't cry anymore. The tears had dried up somewhere between the landing gear touching ground and the moment she saw Nia's body limp on that gurney. Now she just sat, hands folded, staring. A quiet knock broke the silence. A man in a charcoal blazer stepped into the room. Neat haircut, polished shoes. The kind of look that said he wasn't there to comfort her, but to manage her. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, his voice smooth like a talk show host. "I'm James Withers, corporate liaison for Skylinks Air. First of all, I want to express our sincerest apologies." LaTanya didn't stand. She just nodded once, slow. James took a step closer and lowered his voice like they were conspiring. "We've reviewed the situation. Obviously, what happened on that flight shouldn't have happened. Our team is committed to resolving this quickly and respectfully." He reached into a leather folder and pulled out 2 documents. "The airline is prepared to cover all immediate medical costs related to your daughter's emergency. Additionally, we'd like to offer compensation for the distress caused, as well as a public statement expressing concern, without admitting liability, of course." LaTanya raised an eyebrow. He continued, "In exchange, we ask that you refrain from making further public statements about the incident, just until our internal review concludes. Legal reasons, you understand." So that was it. Silence, wrapped up in an apology and a check. "We're also addressing the matter with the flight attendant internally," he added. "You have our assurance this won't be ignored." Internally. There was that word again. LaTanya looked at Nia. Her chest rose and fell beneath the sheets. So small. So still. She remembered her mother, how she used to march in the streets back in the 70s, holding a cardboard sign with nothing but a sharp quote. How she told LaTanya, "Don't wait for someone to hand you a voice. Use your own." She thought of Rosa Parks, not just as a woman on a bus, but as a woman who was tired of being quiet. She thought of Viola Davis in that movie Nia loved, how she held her ground in a courtroom, trembling but unbreakable. She thought of every time she'd sat in a room like this and been asked to wait, to trust, to stay calm, while someone else decided what her truth should look like. James was still watching her, pen in hand, waiting. "I appreciate the gesture," she said slowly. "I really do." He smiled, relieved. "Wonderful. So we can proceed." She shook her head. "No," she said. "We can't." She stood up, walked past him to the chair by the window, and pulled out her notebook. That night, in the dark of her hospital room, with Nia asleep and the machines ticking soft reminders that life was still hanging on, LaTanya wrote. Not for a lawsuit. Not for revenge. She wrote the truth. In her own hand. She described what happened from start to finish. She didn't embellish. Didn't name call. She just told the story, exactly as it unfolded. How she'd asked for help, how she'd been brushed off, how her child nearly died in front of a woman paid to protect passengers. At the end, she wrote one final sentence. I'm not asking for pity or punishment. I'm asking that next time someone like my daughter is believed the first time, not the last minute. She emailed the letter to a local journalist she trusted, a woman she'd met once at a church event. Kind eyes. Good listener. 2 days later, the story was everywhere. Printed on the front page of the Washington Chronicle. Picked up by morning talk shows. Read aloud on air by news anchors who paused, just slightly, on the word believed. Then came the interviews. LaTanya turned most of them down. But the letter? The letter spoke loud enough. On the same day, Deborah's lawyer released a statement on her behalf. My client is being unfairly vilified for following airline protocol. She was simply doing her job under stressful conditions and is now the target of a coordinated public attack. The statement sparked debate. Online threads boiled over. But something had shifted. People weren't just debating who was right. They were listening. LaTanya's words had found their way into living rooms and break rooms, classrooms and council halls. Because what she'd written wasn't just about her. It was about every mother who had been asked to prove she cared. The conference room in the Skylinks corporate building wasn't designed for emotion. It was beige and glass and steel, the kind of space meant to make everything look neutral, safe, a controlled environment like a lab or a courtroom. But that morning, the room felt anything but neutral. Rows of press badges hung around necks. Camera tripods lined the back. Flashbulbs popped in bursts like tiny thunderstorms. LaTanya stood near the side door, watching from behind the curtain as people filled the seats. She held her speech folded neatly in one hand, but her fingers wouldn't stop smoothing the edges. She hadn't wanted to speak, not at first, but the pressure had built too far to contain. Her letter had been honest, maybe too honest, but it had struck something. It had made people feel. Dr. Emery Hall had stood by her the whole time, texting her words of encouragement, sharing stories of other patients whose parents had been dismissed. You're not just talking for you, he'd said. You're talking for all of them. Now here she was. On the other side of the room sat Deborah Klein, silent, expression locked in place. Her lawyer perched stiffly beside her like a shadow that never blinked. There had been no public apology, no acknowledgement from the airline that a mistake had occurred. What they offered instead was a listening session. The press called it a damage control meeting. Someone signaled. A light turned red. It was time. LaTanya walked to the small platform set up at the front. There was a single mic, a glass of water, and the sound of 100 eyes focusing at once. She looked up, then folded the paper in her hand and set it aside. I'm not a public speaker, she began, voice steady. I'm just a mother who almost lost her daughter because someone thought they knew better. There was no anger in her tone. Just wait. I've been asked a lot if I want the flight attendant fired, if I want compensation, if I want revenge. But what I really want is much simpler than that. She paused. I want people, especially those in positions of care, to believe us the first time. Her eyes scanned the crowd. I want a mother's fear to be taken seriously, even if she doesn't have the right clothes, the right accent, the right skin. A camera clicked. I want us to stop calling children dramatic when they're in pain. I want someone like my daughter to be seen, not after she faints, not when she stops breathing, but when she says, I don't feel good, and means it. She gripped the edge of the podium for a moment, not to steady herself, but to ground her words. I don't want anyone to lose their job. I just don't want anyone else to lose a child because they were dismissed as inconvenient. Silence. Heavy, hushed, and full of everything people didn't know how to say out loud. Behind her, someone coughed. A few scribbled notes. LaTanya stepped down. She didn't wait for applause. Later that day, the video of her speech would flood social media again, but this time not as a moment of outrage, this time as a moment of reckoning. Comments rolled in by the thousands. My son has autism. I've had teachers tell me he's just misbehaving. Thank you for speaking up. I'm white, but I felt every word you said. I've been that invisible mom, too. This isn't about race. This is about being heard when it matters most. But race? It makes it worse. We need to face that. Some were angry. Some were uncomfortable. But most were grateful. LaTanya's inbox filled with messages from parents across the country. Her name wasn't trending because she was famous. It was trending because she had said something no one could ignore anymore. And somewhere between the noise, something else shifted. Hospitals requested retraining. A small clinic in Minnesota cited her letter in a new patient rights policy. A flight attendant union posted that they were reviewing bias response training. LaTanya never asked to be a symbol. She would have traded it all just to go back to a regular Tuesday, walking Nia to the school bus with a lunch bag in hand. But something about what had happened made her realize that silence wasn't neutral. It was permission, and she couldn't give it any more. The day after the conference, she sat with Nia on a park bench just outside the hospital. Nia's color had returned, and her laugh was soft, like wind through leaves. "Mom," Nia said, swinging her legs. "Did I do something wrong on a plane?" LaTanya swallowed. "No, baby. You were brave. They just didn't know how to listen." Nia leaned against her. "But you did." LaTanya smiled, holding her close. "I always will." 2 weeks had passed since the press conference, but the story still lingered in quiet headlines and online threads. LaTanya didn't follow all of it. She'd skimmed the updates, seen her own name trending more times than she wanted, but she kept her focus where it mattered, on Nia. The news had come from St. Alders on a cloudy Tuesday morning. Nia had a rare form of chronic hypoglycemia. It wasn't common. It wasn't easy. But it was manageable. With the right care, regular monitoring, and nutrition, Nia could live a full, healthy life. It wasn't a miracle, but it was an answer. And for LaTanya, that meant everything. She hadn't returned to work yet. Her job would wait. Her life had changed in ways that didn't fit neatly into a shift schedule. Instead, she accepted an invitation to speak at a community health seminar, a small gathering of nurses, paramedics, and frontline workers hosted at a neighborhood center near the outskirts of D.C. The room was modest, folding chairs, coffee in styrofoam cups, a whiteboard in the corner. But the conversations were real. She talked about dignity, about listening, about slowing down long enough to really see the people in front of you. Her words weren't flashy. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. But when she spoke about holding her daughter's limp body in that cramped row 25 seat, the room went quiet in the kind of way that stays with you. The changes started trickling in after that. Skylink's Air issued a public statement, not just a press release, but a live Q&A session streamed on their website. They announced the creation of an independent board to oversee discrimination complaints. They opened new training programs for attendants, with a special focus on bias, medical emergencies, and patient advocacy. LaTanya didn't smile when she read it. She nodded. Quiet victory was still victory. As for Deborah Klein, she was gone. Skylinks confirmed her indefinite suspension days after the conference. No press tour, no interviews. She declined every request. But it didn't take long for stories to surface. Former colleagues spoke under condition of anonymity. Apparently, Deborah had racked up several internal reports over the years, moments like what happened on Flight 237, swept quietly under policies and paperwork. This time, no one could sweep. The world had seen it, and the world hadn't looked away. But none of that mattered as much as the walk LaTanya and Nia took down the sidewalk outside St. Alders the morning they were discharged. The sky was soft and overcast, the kind of day where the light felt gentle. Nia clutched a stuffed animal one of the nurses had given her. Her steps were still slow, but steady. LaTanya held her hand loosely, not to guide her anymore, but just to be close. As they turned the corner toward the parking lot, a woman stepped toward them. Mid-30s. Blonde hair pulled back into a messy bun. Tired eyes. A toddler on her hip. "Excuse me," she said, breath-catching. "You're LaTanya, right?" LaTanya nodded. "Yes." The woman looked down at her child, then back up. "I just wanted to say thank you. I saw your speech. I read the letter. It wasn't just about race. It was about all of us. I'm white, but I've been told I was overreacting more times than I can count. You said what so many of us feel." LaTanya didn't know what to say at first, so she smiled. "Sometimes you have to say it out loud," she replied. so they stop acting like you imagined it. The woman nodded, eyes glassy. As she walked away, Nia looked up at her mother. Was she one of us? Nia asked. LaTanya gave her hand a gentle squeeze. She is now. They crossed the lot and climbed into the car. As LaTanya started the engine, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Nia looking out the window. Not worried, not anxious, just quiet. Stronger. The road ahead felt long, but it didn't feel lonely anymore. Flight 237 hadn't just taken them to a new city. It had dropped them into a truth that was hard and loud and unforgiving, but necessary. And when that plane touched down, so did something else. A voice. A fight. A promise. Not just for Nia, but for every mother who had ever had to prove she was telling the truth. Sometimes, the loudest cry for help isn't a scream. It's a quiet plea ignored by the wrong person at the wrong moment. LaTanya's story reminds us that listening, truly listening, can save a life. So here's the question. In a world moving too fast to notice, will we slow down enough to believe someone before it's too late? If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and follow for more powerful, true-to-life stories that matter.